in such a way that we provide irrefutable arguments of the crime, irrefutable arguments of a singular solution, that is, mathematically perfected economy, which I have said for 43 years, from its very first inception as an idea, was a proof of singular solution. There's only one and one only solution to inflation and deflation. There's one and one only solution to maldisposition. There's one and one only solution to systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. And there is one and one only solution to inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of falsified indebtedness by purported interest. So mathematically perfected economy was this proof of singular solution from day one, from the first moment the light lit up in my head. It was a proof of singular solution. It was a disproof of the mere pseudoscience of economics, which is entirely bereft of formal proof and theorem, which is based on a false principle, which instead of being economic, can only multiply artificial costliness upon us until we suffer the present terminal failure. And of course, as we've explained, this transpires as a result of an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation. A vital circulation being a sufficient circulation to sustain commerce and industry or production. And this implicit obligation then derives from a fact that the obfuscation forces us without warrant to pay principal and interest out of a circulation which can be comprised at most of only some remaining principal. So as we're paying more out of circulation than can possibly exist in circulation, because all money is introduced to circulation as only the principal of an obligation to pay principal and interest out of that circulation. And so as we pay principal out of the circulation and are forced by this implicit obligation to reborrow it back into circulation as new debt equal to the former sum of debt which would otherwise have been resolved, this makes it mathematically impossible to pay down a prior sum of debt. So every prior sum of debt persists. Whereas what interest we pay out of a vital circulation is reborrowed as new debt to maintain a vital circulation, with therefore the new debt increasing the total sum of debt by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt until we suffer the present terminal failure, in which a sum of debt, falsified debt, is accumulated, which is impossible for us to service any further. It exceeds our capacity to service it from the existing circulation. This fact that we have already been saturated with all the debt that we can support destroys our creditworthiness to borrow further, which nonetheless remains incumbent upon us to maintain a vital circulation. So not being able to borrow further to reflate the circulation of what interest and principal we're paying out of it, and being as the terminal sum of debt is so great that we pay virtually the entire circulation out of circulation in a little time, owing to the monumental extent of the terminal sum of debt. The form of the failure, therefore, is rapid deflation of the circulation, which completes this terminal failure, and which is right just beyond us at this point in time, which of course explains all of the preposterous methods of artificial sustention, as I call it, where betraying governments across the world in order to persist in the crime and to defend the persistence of the perpetrators merely spend money into circulation on the behalf of accumulating further federal debt that we're not even servicing, merely in order to reflate the circulation so that the crime can persist for some while further. They have no other option but artificial sustention. Now, while these things succeed for some while, the reason that I originally proposed these methods of artificial sustention to the Reagan campaign and administration was to prove that each of them have themselves minimal finite lifespans, in part derived from a fact that there's a finite capacity for a failing system to absorb this artificial sustention, which is meant merely to artificially reflate the circulation beyond, the point of terminal indebtedness. So we have to understand that we're not in a recession, that this process is terminal. And this mandate proves that it's terminal. It also proves the rights of sovereign individuals to rise above this and to claim this crime against them and to resolve it. Because we cannot be denied, as I was explaining Thursday and standing in this discussion that I had with Michael Tellinger of South Africa. I was explaining that these methods, that this system is in its terminal throes, is unsustainable, and that the crime is one that we have a like right, if it is not a crime on the one hand, to do the same thing in resolution, not payment technically, but resolution of the falsified debts claimed by the purported banking system. But this is just to commit a like crime against another criminal, which isn't justice. So in truth, no justice, no judge can find in the favor of that, but that insofar as it resolves the falsified sum of debt. Whereas if instead of just claiming that we're resolving a debt, which is what we're not, we're resolving a falsified debt by committing a like crime, if the crime is permissible, we have the right to do it. On the other hand, if it is a crime, we have a right to do it to resolve the crime if and only if we can demonstrate how to resolve the crime, which is the whole issue here. This is why it's not enough to just say, well, let's just resolve these falsified debts. We have to understand what they are, what their lack of legal basis is. We have to resolve them however we may, which is in either case accomplished by this process. But in order to provide the judge with an option to decide in our favor, we have to demonstrate what the resolution of the crime is. Otherwise, each and every judge that's confronted with this situation would have to resolve themselves what mathematically perfected economy is. And we cannot necessarily at all expect them to do so. Having that solution, however, and providing it, here in this one mandate, we are resolving all of our legal arguments as we have to in order to prevail in this issue. So, if I may, I will read the summary again. I know I read this the other day, but I'm going to read it again nevertheless. The mandate begins with a summary so that people can read this summary who are lazy and want to take it on the faith of others who have studied it, that it's worthy of our signature and that they should sign it as well, which is not good practice because people who are not masters of these issues are really unfit to govern themselves, which is largely why we have suffered the consequences that we have. So the summary begins as such. This indispensable declaration of law by the people proves irrefutably that the present global monetary failure is altogether terminal, resolvable, and perpetrated by intentional abuse of power. Given irrefutable arguments, no purportedly representative government in the world can reasonably count on any furtherance of authority to prevail over us. For the perpetrators are few, we are many, and every rightful power and leverage are inherently on our side. We therefore establish rights, even as sovereign individuals, to protect ourselves against every further potential abuse of power, however potentially condoned by an apathetic or otherwise offending majority. Those who wish to persist in the imposed system's falsified debts are even compelled to pay them. If I may break into here, I will explain that as a strategy. Those who are apathetic have incurred a tremendous amount of debt that they are unable to service. In fact, since the early Reagan administration, federal debt has increased in the United States without any increase in taxation, which means that federal debt has increased all that while without even servicing any of the furtherance of federal debt. The apathy of anyone who refuses to join us in this mandate, then, imposes a tremendous cost on all present people, but a criminal cost upon our progeny. We have no right to do that. And so what we're doing here is part of our strategy, which isn't just merely strategical, it's strategical that we do call it into play here, because if we fail to do so, we wouldn't be exerting all the leverage that we can and should in favor of enlisting people in this mandate. So what we're doing is, fine, you don't want to think about it. You don't want to get it right in your head. Well, then fine. You live your life, the rest of it, and you pay interest on your house, and you pay interest on your credit cards, and you pay interest on everything else. But you also are going to resolve your share of the debt as persists on account of all the people who do not enlist in this mandate. Now, I've done the math on this, and its costs are staggering. That is, each individual, as they exist somewhere in the timeline of time, as relates to the accumulation of debt over their lifetime, means that older people have just a phenomenal share of this debt on account of compounding effects of interest. Now, here the wording is such in the document itself that this relates not just to federal debt, but to costs of, for instance, the Federal Reserve imposing further debt and manipulations which sustain things like the securities market falsely, imposing those costs in one way or another upon the rest of us. So this would include, for instance, the derivatives fiascos. Now, as those costs are distributed over the lifespan of different individuals, it comes out that a person in this country, in the United States, of average age of 80, has incurred costs which they're merely passing on to future generations of approximately $17 million per capita. Now, I know that sounds like an outrageous amount of money. It's not what you hear in typical estimates of these costs. But when you take and you divide their small segment of the population over time into all of the costs, including derivatives fiascos, what they haven't contributed to Social Security but yet have taken from it, so on and so forth, this is compelling leverage for these people to say, well, you're right. I finally have to recognize that that is a crime that I don't want to participate in. So we say, those who wish to persist in the imposed system's false